Hello and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio on this first day of the A15 transmission season. This program was researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson and produced in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Okeechobee, Florida. I'm Jeff White. Today on Wavescan, Railway Radio in Australia, Part 2. The story of a lonely radio studio in an isolated area of Africa. And our special QSL of the week, Long Distance on Medium Wave. Wavescan presents Focus on the South Pacific, a year-long series of reports on radio broadcasting and listening in the South Pacific. And we start out with some news on this program about the South Pacific, things that are happening there. No doubt you've heard of the recent cyclone, which affected Vanuatu especially, and also the Solomon Islands. Well, we have some news here that comes to us from Chris Greenway in England of the British DX Club, telling us that as the BBC World Service FM transmitter in Vanuatu is off the air due to the cyclone, there is now a temporary shortwave service for the country each morning at 1900 to 2000 UTC on 9855 kilohertz. It's also planned to have an evening broadcast at 9 to 1100 UTC on 11680 kilohertz, but this was not yet operational, at least on the 20th of March. Now, Chris Greenway comments that 9855 kilohertz for the 19 to 2000 transmission may be from Kranji, Singapore, which is listed for BBC to Papua New Guinea and Oceania at this hour. Now, we also have some news from Keith Perrone of PCJ Radio in Taiwan, telling us that Radio Australia has increased its output. Only shortwave could be used for getting information in the area. Both Radio New Zealand International and Radio Australia have been running special messages. And Keith says, I just got word that one of our FM relays in the Pacific in Port Vila, Vanuatu, is off the air. It's been off the air since March 13th. The antenna was destroyed, the computer, and so was the transmitter. It's a 50-watt transmitter. We're in the process now of sending a new transmitter, antenna, and computer. We should be back on the air in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. Now, because we're using IP to send audio and upload programs to the FTP, it might take a few months before communication lines are stable enough. In the interim, we'll be using DRM to relay programs. The schedule we had before was PCJ, 4 hours a day, Radio Australia, BBC World Service, Voice of America, and Radio New Zealand International from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. When the station comes back on the air, it won't be a full service as it was until the lines are restored. So we'll be relaying only Radio New Zealand International's DRM service at the following times on the frequency of 88.5 FM in Port Vila, Vanuatu. From 0251 to 0400 UTC, 17675 kilohertz. From 0651 to 0758 UTC on 11690 kilohertz, 1551 to 1850 UTC on 9780 kilohertz, 1951 to 2050 UTC on 15720 kilohertz, 2051 to 2150 UTC on 17675 kilohertz, and 2255 to 0200 UTC on 17675 kilohertz. Those are the DRM transmissions of Radio New Zealand International, which will be relayed in Port Vila on 88.5 FM. And Keith says the DRM receiver we'll be using is a Uniwave that's being donated by someone who worked at Radio Australia. Now we have some other news related to the cyclone that comes to us from the Danish Shortwave Club International. Thanks to Anker Peterson for this information. This first item actually involving the Solomon Islands. This from Ron Howard in California and Harold Sellers in British Columbia. 5020 kilohertz is the Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation from Honiara, heard from 1247 to 1505 UTC on March 11th. Recently it had been off frequency. Today, on March 11th, there was an extended special program to provide tropical storm cyclone information in Solomon Pidgin languages. Mention of the Solomon Islands Meteorological Service update, flash flooding, a phone number to call with reports of property damage, several phoned-in reports of weather conditions, a mention of the storm moving at 3 knots, What God Can Do segment of Christian religious songs in English, and many Pacific Island pop songs, mostly fair reception. On March 12th, it was heard at 11:54 to 12:01 sign-off, back to normal with a popular song and announcement in the Tok-Pisin language. At 11:56 UTC, welcome to our evening devotional, full ID and national anthem. Decent reception, says Ron Howard in California and also Harold Sellers in British Columbia, Canada. This station, the Solomon Islands, was also heard in Sweden at 1902 sign-on until 1930 on March 10th, with the best signal in Sweden around 1930. Their new transmitter, most times with a better signal than the old one, says Thomas Nielsen in Sweden. Now on 9545 kilohertz, also, this is Honiara, Solomon Islands, SIBC, heard from 2015 to 2033 UTC on March 15th, with an ID and popular songs, thought to be the same transmitter as before, says Tomoaki Wagai in Japan. It was also heard with an extended schedule due to the nearby cyclone at 1305 to 1407 UTC on March 15th, with a relay of Wantok FM, 96.3 megahertz, playing religious songs in English. An ID says Wantok FM 96.3, good times, great music. Mostly poor reception due to heavy adjacent interference, but 1357 to 1400 UTC in the clear with fair reception. Not surprisingly, they continued on after their normal 0501 sign-off on March 16th, heard at 0519 to 0539 with a relay of Radio Australia, with extensive reporting from Vanuatu and all that Australia is doing to help. Slightly delayed from Radio Australia's parallel frequencies of 15240, 15415, 17840. And then at 0539, it cut away to local Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation programs, and a phone advertisement for international calling, a medical public service announcement for leprosy, an employment announcement, and at 0556, a weather report with heavy rain warnings for most of the provinces, with talk of Cyclone Nathan in the Coral Sea. It started out poor, but reception improved to fairly readable, says Ron Howard in California. Now from Vanuatu, on 3945 kilohertz, Radio Vanuatu in Port Vila was heard at 1312 UTC on March 7th, before the cyclone, by Wolfgang Buschel in Germany, with pop music, and this was heard via a receiver in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. It was also heard at 1407 to past 1505 on March 9th, 11th, and 12th, one of their better days, with light pop songs, including the usual You Are the Only One, so this must be, in fact, a very long musical loop that they keep playing every day. Never had many announcements. It was still heard at 0451, so continuing on with their 24-hour operation. Of course, this is after the sign-off of RN2 from Japan on weekdays, says Ron Howard in California. Radio Vanuatu in Port Vila disappeared from the air during the tropical cyclone Pam on March 14th. According to a report from Brian Clark in New Zealand via Ron Howard, Brian said, Radio Vanuatu was definitely missing March 14th when I checked in the 0800 to 1000 UTC period. Australian TV News, monitored last night, was showing the heavy devastations around Vila. Hopefully the issue is just a power supply as so much of the island group can only receive shortwave signals, says Brian Clark in New Zealand. Now, Ron Howard in California said checking from 1216 to 1305 UTC on March 14th, he found nothing on 3945 kilohertz, the Radio Vanuatu frequency. As it was the weekend, Japan signed off early, leaving 3945 in the clear, but not a trace of Radio Vanuatu. And Ron Wagner in Australia, via Ron Howard in California, said no Vanuatu in Australia either, on either frequency, at 1900 this morning, March 14th. And the Danish press on March 16th said local communication on Vanuatu was down, except the internet. Bad news there about the tropical cyclone in the South Pacific, affecting Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands, particularly Vanuatu. Well, in this, our second installment about railway radio in Australia, we present the story of the mobile radio station 3YB that traveled the rails in the mainland state of Victoria. Medium wave station 3YB began service in a pair of road vehicles on October 1st, 1931. The equipment was transferred into a railway carriage a little over a year later, and 4 years later again it was inaugurated as a land-based station in the country city of Warrnambool, and it is still on the air to this day under the same call sign 3YB with 2 kilowatts on 882 kilohertz. Now here's Ray Robinson with part 2 of Railway Radio in Australia.
Thanks, Jeff. During the year 1901, a special railway carriage was built at the Newport Railway Workshops in suburban Melbourne. It was intended for VIP usage and given the official name Alexandra, though in the Victorian railway system it was identified as State Car Number 2. This railway carriage, the Alexandra, was built specifically for the use of the Duke and Duchess of York during their royal tour of Australia in 1901. They visited Australia for the purpose of participating in government celebrations honouring the federation of the 6 Australian colonies into the unified Commonwealth of Australia. While in the state of Victoria, the Duke and Duchess were accommodated in the Alexandra railway car for some of their travels. 9 years later, the royal pair were elevated to the throne of England as King George V and Queen Mary. And then 18 years after that, in 1919, the State Car Number 2 Alexandra was updated, modernised and renamed Melville. Give another 13 years and the Melville railway car was made available to a group of radio-oriented businessmen who had launched a successful mobile radio broadcasting station on wheels just a year earlier. As a mobile radio station, the Melville railway car provided adequate accommodation for an on-air studio, for the radio transmitter, living quarters for the staff of 2, and had an AC power generator installed on a rear platform. The mobile power generator was used if local AC power was not available. The collapsible antenna system was fastened above the roof of the railway carriage on 2 masts, and a counterpoise was installed on the roof together with an earth pin that was driven into the ground near the rails. A 25-watt medium-wave transmitter radiated initially on 1145 kHz, though this was changed a couple of years later to 1060 kHz. The mobile radio station was identified with a brightly painted sign on each side of the railway carriage declaring 3YB Mobile Broadcasting Services. On October the 17th, 1932, the radio equipment was transferred from the 2 motor vehicles, a Model A Ford and a Model T Ford, and installed into the Melville railway carriage. The Melville was then towed out on the rails from Melbourne into the Goulburn Valley on its first journey as a mobile radio broadcasting station. At the time, there were 5,000 miles of railway lines interconnected in the Australian state of Victoria, though the gauge was different from the 2 neighbouring states of New South Wales and South Australia. So thus it was that trains in Victoria could not move across state lines into the railway system of the 2 neighbouring states. Back then, the Victorian railway system connected 300 towns and settlements with the state capital, Melbourne. The cost to the 3YB mobile radio station for the usage of the railway system was £12 per week, which also included needed towing. The station was not permitted to go on the air within 30 miles of an already existing land-based medium-wave broadcasting station, and at the time there were just 7 country stations on the air in the entire state of Victoria. When the Melville 3YB arrived at a designated location, it took just 13 minutes to raise the antenna system, attach the earthing or grounding, connect electricity, and place the station on the air. Where possible, the station made a connection to the local electricity supply when it was available and within the needed parameters, that is, a correct and stable voltage, and AC, not DC. On one occasion, when the station needed to use its own power generator, it was because they found that the local power was generated by a water wheel, and the voltage varied between 160 and 260 volts. At each location, programming was aired for 4 hours each evening, beginning at 6:30 p.m, with just 3 hours of programming on Sunday evenings. A small format magazine called Listener In was published weekly in Melbourne from 1927 to 1954, and it had daily listings of radio programs for the following week from medium wave stations all across Australia. Among the listings for the fixed stations in Victoria, Listener In also included up-to-date information about the mobile station 3YB as it moved to its various locations. All programming on 3YB was presented live with the participation of visitors, and at times off-site broadcasts were staged from important locations and events in the regional towns and cities. News and feature programs via a telephone line from Melbourne were also spliced into the local program service, and on occasion school children made broadcasts over the station as they gave greetings to their parents. Many local businesses took the opportunity to advertise over the station, and this proved to be a commercial success. However, as time went by, the number of fixed land-based medium-wave stations in country Victoria increased markedly, and more were planned. With each new station coming onto the air, the available locations for mobile 3YB were decreasing, and the owners decided it would be better for them to establish a fixed station in a large country city rather than to remain mobile with a continually diminishing market. So thus it was that the highly successful radio broadcasting service provided by 3YB, the radio station on rails, came to an end after 3 years of wandering the statewide railway system. The railway radio station was finally closed in October 1935, and a new land-based 3YB was inaugurated with new equipment in the city of Warrnambool on January the 18th of the following year, 1936. Much of the mobile radio equipment was taken over by 3YB engineer Harry Fuller and incorporated into his own amateur radio station VK3HF. The new fixed station retained the now well-known call sign 3YB at its new location. The digit 3 indicated the state of Victoria, and the YB honoured the Young brothers in Ballarat City who had fostered the introduction of the mobile radio station some 9 years earlier. Over the years, 3YB in Warrnambool has upgraded its electronic equipment on several occasions, though they're still on the air today, on medium wave and with the same call sign 85 years later. The Melville railway carriage reverted to ordinary railway usage after the radio equipment was removed. It continued to be used occasionally for the benefit of VIP visitors, and in particular for some of the subsequent royal tours. When its official duties ended, it was then taken into occasional usage for special railway excursions for historic railway enthusiasts. In 1990, the carriage went into storage at Newport, where it had originally been built. Since then, the Melville was taken to Seymour in country Victoria for historic preservation, where it now forms part of the Seymour Railway Heritage Centre.
Thank you, Ray Robinson of KVOH in Los Angeles.
You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
Let us take an interesting story from a recent issue of an American club magazine about a lonely radio studio located in an isolated area of Africa. And we're going to adapt it for broadcast on radio. This story about a radio production studio operated by Adventist World Radio was provided by Ralph Perry in Wheaton, Illinois, and it's found in the NASWA Journal. It's the North American Shortwave Association, NASWA Journal for February earlier this year. The small city of Marua is located in the far north of the country of Cameroon in Africa, and it is the regional capital with a population of less than 250,000. There's a small regional airport nearby, and mail delivery in the area is described as spotty. For many years now, Adventist World Radio has operated a small radio production studio in the building that serves as the headquarters for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the northern area of the Cameroons. Programming in this studio is produced in the widely spoken Fulfulde language, and over the years it has been broadcast over various stations that give radio coverage into the Fulfulde language areas, including using Meyerton in South Africa. Radio coverage for the Fulfulde programming during this past shortwave transmission period, B14, has been provided by the Deutsche Welle shortwave station, located a little north of Kigali in Rwanda. However, as we announced last week on Wavescan, this powerful Deutsche Welle relay station is closing this weekend at the time of transition from the B14 to the A15 transmission period. The director of the Cameroon AWR studio in Marua, Pastor H.T. Richard, states his appreciation in receiving a letter from a shortwave listener in the United States who heard his programming via Deutsche Welle Kigali. He also states that the studio is quite small and quite simple, though plans are underway for location in another building with updated studio equipment. It is intended also that live programming will then be added for broadcast locally to the Marua city area. However, until the new studio becomes available, only recorded programming will be prepared for broadcast in the international scheduling from Adventist World Radio. We might add that somewhere around 75 production studios around the world are affiliated with Adventist World Radio. Some of these studios are quite large and turning out programming in many languages, whereas others are quite small and working in only one language. If fellow DXers are making contact directly with AWR production studios, we would suggest that care be taken in these matters, remembering that the staff may not understand the circumstances associated with international radio monitoring and the nature of QSLs. Even though English is the international working language of the Adventist denomination, yet not all radio staff may be able to communicate in English. Then, too, it's possible that finances might be quite tight and the cost of posting mail, perhaps even registered mail in order to secure assurance of delivery, may be very high in the local currency. Remember, too, that some of the production studios are located in sensitive areas of the world where their staff has to be very careful about international contacts. Here now is a little recording of what the AWR Fulfulde language program sounds like.
Sobajo kettiniɗo assalamu alaikum. Aɗo heɗito sautu tammunde do radio adventiste e nder duniyaaru fuu. Inde am Aissatu Zadak ɗoftoma yalade fuu a wakkatire nde.
Adventist World Radio in Fulfulde. You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Now our special QSL of the week, long distance on medium waves. Writing from Argentina, international radio monitor Daniel Camporini in the city of Munro informs us that he heard a medium wave station on a small island in the Indian Ocean. Munro is a tourist city on the northern edge of Buenos Aires. The station that Daniel Camporini heard was RFO, Radio Française d'Outre-mer, located in the town of Dzaoudzi, on the island Petite Terre, in the French archipelago Mayotte, off the eastern edge of Africa. This station operated on a frequency of 1458 kilohertz, with a power of just 4 kilowatts. The colorful QSL card that Daniel Camporini received shows a map of the world with the QSL details typed in very neatly. A handwritten message in Spanish expresses surprise and appreciation for the reception report from such a distance. Music from Vanuatu ends this edition of Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson. Next week on Wavescan, radio broadcasting in the land of 1,000 hills, our Japan DX report, and our special QSL of the week. Reminder that we have several QSL cards available for you. Send your AWR and KSDA reception reports for Wavescan to the AWR address in Indianapolis, and also to the station your radio is listening to, WRMI, WWCR, or KVOH, or to the AWR relay stations that carry Wavescan. Remember, too, you can send a reception report to the DX reporters when their segment is on the air here. Reports from Japan, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Australia, and India. They will verify with their own colorful QSL card. Return postage and an address label are always appreciated. Our address is Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. Our email address is wavescan@awr.org. That's wavescan@awr.org. I'm Jeff White at shortwave station WRMI in Okeechobee, Florida. Till next week, good listening, everyone.